I'm Robin Amlot of IBS Intelligence. You're listening to the IBS iViews podcast, and it's a welcome back to the podcast to Biju Suresh Babu, Managing Director, Banking and Financial Services for Fiorano Software. Our topic for today, open banking in UAE, the United Arab Emirates. Let's start with the basics. Biju, what's the framework that the Central Bank of the UAE are putting in place?
Well, to begin with, Robin, once again, thank you for having me back on the podcast. It's always exciting to chat. So the UAE is very interesting, right? I mean, the last big regulatory mandates we've seen around open banking have been pretty much, the big moves have been UK, open banking, Europe, PSD2, and then Brazil and Australia and all that. So the UAE have made some really bold moves. I think to begin with, the big differentiator is the fact that in the UAE it's open finance, it's not open banking. So whereas what we saw in Europe with PSD2 and UK with open banking was mostly around savings accounts, the scope is much broader in the UAE. So to begin with, it's called open finance. So to start, they've got banking and insurance covered, and then more importantly, even within banking, the kind of accounts they've got is a much broader scope. So they've got savings accounts, they've got mortgage accounts, they've got current accounts, they've got loans, credit cards, insurance. But at the moment, the kind of work happening around insurance is around motor insurance, but that's going to be expanded into health and life insurance too very soon. So the scope is much, much broader. And it's very interesting to see how open banking is evolving to open finance and then broader open data driven economies. Because the other thing to think about is the fact that the UAE have something called NABID, which is almost open health. It's not being driven the same way open finance is being driven there, but they are taking some very, very bold moves.
Interesting that you focus on the fact that it's open finance, not open banking. In fact, the open finance regulations, as I understand it, were originally announced back in April of last year, April 2024. Where are we now exactly on implementation? What's the timeline?
Because of the scope is wider than what we've seen in other countries, which was primarily savings accounts. And because there are more accounts under scope, naturally the number of institutes that are being affected to comply with these mandates are more. So as the UAE have done with earlier mandates around things like instant payments, they are implementing in multiple cohorts. So you're right, the initial announcements were last year. Everything they're doing under open finance comes from under what they call the Financial Information Transformation, the FIT program, run by the Central Bank of UAE. At the moment, implementation is well underway. It looks like the first cohort of banks, which are primarily the tier one banks, which are all under various stages of implementation, will be live in the ecosystem in a couple of months' time. And we also are working with a number of institutes on that front too. But it's very, very active, definitely underway, moving in the right direction, and quite aggressively also.
Let's talk a little bit about how the financial institutions themselves are responding. Tier one banks, you say, are on the way. What happens next? Which set of institutions is going to come along next?
Tier one banks are running. Some insurance companies are active right now already, going to go into part of the initial cohorts. Tier two, tier three banks are going to follow. This is going to trickle down to other regulated institutes also. It's too early to comment in terms of exactly who and when those dates are going to be, because one thing the central bank are doing are exactly they're issuing guidelines and dates to different institutes, which are called LFIs in the UAE, which is a licensed financial institution, which then encompasses banks and insurance companies to different deadlines and dates, which kind of work back to their multiple cohorts. But one thing that's interesting is that a lot of the banks in the UAE, what they've done really cool is they've actually employed or got in contractors from the UK and Europe. So that best of breed experience from the rest of the world is now in the UAE. And as a result of that, the other thing we're saying is that while, of course, there's a compliance mandate on the LFIs, a lot of the LFIs are quite proactively looking beyond at how they can leverage open banking beyond compliance. So what they're doing right now as they correctly should, is putting in place the right infrastructure for integration, orchestration, API management, identity management, to be able to not stop at just compliance. The banks are very proactively putting in place that infrastructure to be able to help them modernize towards full API banking models. And what's even more interesting is that they're not stopping there. A lot of the banks are looking to become a data consumer, like a fintech or a TPP, and then kind of overlaying open banking data sets with or leading that into a more personalized journey proposition using AI. And as you know, that kind of work fits into what we are doing because what we do is pretty much around orchestration integration. And AI is evolving, again, as you well know, from, ChatGPT has kind of broken all possible limitations that everyone had around using third-party products, right? And AI, and it's now become a household name, but AI in the banking space is evolving from what is just using a chat interface to agentic AI and using large language models and small language models, quite often trained on bank's own data. So there's a tremendous amount of innovation happening there. And unlike, back in the day where we saw a lot of resistance from banks in the UK and Europe to do this, because back then, the resistance was understandable. Banks are kind of embracing it in the UAE, and they're going way beyond compliance. So that's really good to see.
Well, there's one way of looking at this, and that is to say, yeah, we're going beyond compliance. You mentioned that yourself. But the banks in the UAE, the financial institutions in the UAE, have grasped the fact that this is a business opportunity as well.
They have, and to be fair, we're both based in London. I think we did open banking. Well, the UK did open banking back in 2018. So, and I think we've created a great template for the world to learn from. And what other countries are doing as they should be is actually building on top of the UK model. So when it hit the banks in the UK, it was a shock because we had GDPR just before that. And until then, everyone thought, the data is mine as a bank. It's not. The data belongs to a customer. But I think, the banks in the UAE and other countries now adopting open banking have the benefit of learning from what we've all gone through. And it's the fact that there's no point in just complying alone. You do what you have to do, but critically put in place the infrastructure to kind of modernize your bank. And that's what's happening now.
You mentioned the customer there. I've also mentioned the customer earlier on. What does the open finance framework that the CVUAE is putting in place, what does it actually mean for customers? We talk a lot about the technology and what it means for the institutions and what the institutions have to do. What does it actually mean for the customer, the end consumer?
Well, the goal of open banking for any country is normally better financial inclusion, more options for customers. And what's happening is by combining these multiple data sets from, insurance and savings accounts and mortgages and loans, honestly, for the first time in the world, I think we're able to, or banks are able to create a proper 360-degree customer profile, right? Because, while open banking UK's scope was great for, right, it was still savings accounts, but having a multi-bank view of a savings account, while it gives you a lot, and we have benefited tremendously from it, so as have customers in the UK. I think now with the additional scopes coming in, so having a multi-bank, multi-currency view of a customer's financial profile across savings, current accounts, mortgages, loans, credit card, insurance, right? That is actually a full customer view. And the kind of propositions that are being built by financial institutions and TPPs on the back of that data set is offering tremendously powerful features and benefits to customers in terms of better choice, more options, in terms of being able to manage an individual's financial health better. Financial inclusion is just one part of it, right? But it's all about how you or me as an individual or as individuals can manage our financial health life in a better way. And that is really coming together by the fact that the Central Bank of UAE is pulling together so many account types.
I want you to spell it out for me. How does the regime in the UAE compare to others around the world? You were saying they were bringing in people from the UK, people from Europe. They were bringing in best practice from around the world. How far ahead of other institutions, other regulatory frameworks are the CBUAE?
I mean, it's a good question. I don't know if I'm qualified to comment on the Central Bank of the UAE. However, from everything we are seeing, they're a very ambitious regulator. And as everything else we're seeing in the UAE, they want to be the best at what they do. So, seeing what they're doing in practice by creating a much, much broader scope, by bringing in, the best of class expertise from all over the world is something, we've seen the UAE do multiple times before. And I feel quite privileged to be part of some of these journeys that are happening in the financial service space there. But I mean, it's a very forward-looking regulator. And I think we need more of that, don't we?
Biju Suresh Babu, Managing Director, Banking and Financial Services at Fiorano Software. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robin.